I'm Kelsey. This is my channel, The Fancy Hat Lady Reads. I'm wearing one of my fancy booktube hats, and today I am bringing you a double book review of two books that I got review copies of from the publishers via NetGalley. Now, these were both February 6th releases, although one of them had previously been published in other editions. And while I try in my double reviews to pair together books that go together for some reason, that will appeal to similar audiences or have things in common, my books that I've read that I'm working on reviews for right now are a kind of eclectic bunch, and so this is going to be a slightly odd pairing. The first book I am going to be reviewing in this video is Moonshine by Jasmine Gower. This is from Angry Robot Books. It's an adult fantasy novel, and it's Gower's traditionally published debut. And the second book that I'm going to be talking about is the Book of Perle by Timothée de Fombelle. Now, this is a YA fantasy novel originally published in 2014 and translated from French. The English translation is by Sam Gordon and Sarah Ardizzone, and I think this translation may have previously been available in some form, but this review copy that I got was for the hardcover release of this book from Candlewick Press. What I'm going to say these books definitely do have in common is that they both have stunningly gorgeous covers. On some level, these were both cover requests for me. They are both standalones, and while one is adult and one is YA, I think an argument could be made that these both have some amount of crossover appeal. Moonshine, because it has some of that fast-paced action and high-stakes adventure that we, at least now in America, tend to associate with YA fantasy, and the Book of Perle because, though it is YA, it doesn't. It relies on different storytelling mechanisms. So I'm going to start with my review of Moonshine. There's a lot to like about Moonshine. A fun, exciting fantasy with a setting based on the 1920s. I'm a huge fan of fantasies that utilize non-traditional time periods for inspiration, and I'm always happy to see more of them. Soot City, the setting for this novel, is in a country called Ashland, a New World stand-in for the US on a continent that has long been uninhabitable due to volcanic activity, but is now home to a young nation of immigrants and their descendants picking themselves up by their bootstraps. Our protagonist, Daisy Dell, is a college graduate trying to make ends meet and have a good time as a liberated young woman of a new era. Daisy takes a job as a typist, but the company that she works for turns out to be far from what it seems. Daisy is also not quite what she seems. Her immigrant grandmother brought knowledge of a dark ritual magic with her and passed that knowledge on to Daisy, along with a number of trinkets imbued with magical properties. Daisy has no qualms about using her trinkets, but she believes that the deeper secrets of her grandmother's magic should remain secret. Even methodical magic, the most commonly understood form of magic in Ashland, has strong detractors. There's conservative paranoia surrounding it, and mana, the substance that methodical magicians use to replenish their energy, is outlawed in a parallel of our world's prohibition on alcohol. Eventually, Daisy must learn what the company she works for really does, and how far to trust her new boss and colleagues with her knowledge of ritual magic. Gower's cast of characters here is effortlessly inclusive. Not only is Soot City a melting pot of nationalities, but Daisy's new cohort includes characters with a variety of gender, sexual, and romantic identities. Additionally, this motley crew all have different relationships to magic, mana, and their jobs, and themes of acceptance and friendship are central to the emotional arc of this book as Daisy comes to understand more about each of them. Where Moonshine ultimately loses a couple points for me is in the plot itself, because it frequently felt like I couldn't actually identify a driving point to it. Sure, there's arcane magic, thrilling action, political scheming, and all the rest, but there were times when I wasn't sure what parts were actually important. There's a major side escapade with a fairy that needs to be gotten back to its other world, while in the meantime, Daisy and company are trying to avoid getting arbitrarily murdered for increasingly convoluted reasons. And a lot of the story's forward motion relies upon incompetent blunders and dumb mistakes from a supposedly super competent and elite hitwoman/assassin character. I will say that although Moonshine is decidedly a standalone, which, like, hooray, I like standalones, there's enough complex thought put into this world building that this world could super easily sustain more stories. And I, for one, would be happy to read more books exploring this world if Gower wanted to write them. I found Moonshine to be fast-paced and enjoyable, and I gave it 3 out of 5 stars on Goodreads. Next, I am going to talk about the Book of Perle, which uses a very different style of writing. This is a multi-layered puzzle of a fairy tale. When we first meet our narrator, he tells us a mystifying story of something that happened to him in his teens that drove him to the home of a man seemingly named Joshua Perle, whose multitude of suitcases and isolated existence inspired a fierce curiosity. But if you want to know who this narrator is, or why he's telling this story, you're going to have to wait. Because the majority of the book is split between 2 different storylines, neither of them his. So once upon a time, in a magical kingdom, a young prince named Ilyan was born in a palace on a lake, and came of age hiding from the tyrannical reign of his elder brother. This is one story. In the other, our prince, cursed, banished, and alone, finds himself adrift in our world. A world that doesn't have magic, where stories seem to have no power. A world that appears not to believe. In this world, he becomes Joshua Perle, a name he acquires from the kindly marshmallow shop owners who take him in. He goes to war, he experiences tragedy, he grows old, he searches for a way back home. This part of the book is in large part historical fiction with a moving World War II story. Eventually our narrator will be drawn back into this mystery when he's a grown man with children of his own. But in the meantime, it's the dual life story of the doomed young Prince Ilyan, who is also Joshua Perle. So far, so good. But every fairy tale hero must have his true love, of course. And so this is also the story of Olia, the fairy who gives up her magical powers and immortality for the sake of her mortal prince's love. That's not a spoiler, by the way, it's literally in the opening scene of the book. With Olia remaining on the margins of the story, this narrative device was just never going to sit well with me. In different parts of the book, Olia is repeatedly presented as either an unseen guardian angel or as an elusive muse for others to obsess over. And then we get the various descriptions of her in which she is more perfect than any human girl could be, beloved by everyone who sees her at first glance, ethereal and tragic, impossibly desirable and made even more so by sorrow and loss, etc., etc., etc. Whether in their world or ours, Ilyan and Olia are classic fairy tale lovers of a type, with a romance based on very little interaction, separated by time, space, and realms, persecuted beyond imagining in their quest to find each other once again. Is this true to the fairy tale archetype upon which the entire book is built? Sure. I'll grant you that. But to me it seemed like a misplaced way to frame a story that at its best moments presents belief in fairy tales and magic as a form of hope in our often dark and mundane world. So when at last our narrator finally appeals to us to believe, he's unfortunately not asking us to believe in the fairies, in the cursed kingdom, in the power of stories, or in the hope that the wrongs of the past will be righted. Though all of these story elements are present in the book, he's asking us to believe in this ideal of a perfect love, of happily ever after for the heroic prince and the girl who gave up everything for his sake. So it seems to me like the author has taken a really strong concept and interesting story structure here, but fixated on the wrong part of what it means for something to be a fairy tale, to expect us, the reader, to feel compelled by. And that's why, even though it's a beautifully crafted book, after puzzling about my feelings about it for a long time, I felt like I could only give the Book of Perle 3 out of 5 stars as well. And I'll add, because both of these were 3-star ratings, 3 stars for me is not a bad rating. These were both books that I personally enjoyed immensely in different ways. I think the classification as YA is really interesting with regards to the Book of Perle. It takes place over a long span of time, over the course of an entire lifetime, and at points of the book focuses on different characters who are not always teenagers. But it does still feel like YA to me because it does center around points in the characters' lives when they are or appear to be teenagers. But even more so to me, I think, because of the way the story and the message of it feels naive. And I think that's kind of interesting because that naivete is not necessarily a quality that we associate with popular YA books in America, at least right now. Anyhow, that was my extra little ramble at the end. Let me know if you've read either of these books or if you're planning to. Let me know what you think. Anyhow, I hope you are having a nice day. That is all. Bye for now.